Welcome to the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Donna Connolly and I'm passionate about inspiring, motivating, supporting and informing women over 50 to embrace this exciting time of life. Health and wellness in mind, body and spirit are the foundations for living well, but there is so much more to a life well lived. Each week, through conversations with my guests, I'll be presenting topics that will help us all to live well and enjoy life. So join me as we discover new ways to become women living well after 50. Are you ready to start living? What are you waiting for? Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Donna Connolly and it's lovely to have you join me. Now, do you know what ultra-processed foods are? There's a lot of talk about it lately, and my guest today, Donna Connolly from Retirement Reflections, is going to share with us her personal journey. Now, Donna is a dear friend of mine that I met through blogging about 10 years ago when she retired. Before she retired, she lived and worked for 14 years in Beijing, China, as a middle school principal and a deputy director at a large international school. She then retired to beautiful Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada, where she started her blog, Retirement Reflections. Now, Donna's been doing a lot of research into what to eat for a healthy and lifestyle and for longevity. And she's going to be talking to us about her experience today with ultra-processed foods, what they are, and why we should be eliminating them from our diet. So let's go and join the conversation. Welcome, Donna. It's so lovely to have you join me again on the Women Living Well After 50 podcast.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here, Sue.
Now, you and I have been friends online mostly for about 10 years now, and I'm delighted to have you on today. We have met in person, which is wonderful, and who knows, in the future we might be able to again. But what we're going to be talking about today is something that you've been really researching over the last few months, and that's ultra-processed foods. And knowing you, Donna, and for the listeners, my dear friend is one of those people that if you talk about something, she's got to dive deep into it. She's got to go down that rabbit hole and she's got to find everything out about it. And she's been a great help in our Facebook group lately, helping us with our clean eating. So what I want to talk to you about, first of all, Donna, is what prompted you to start looking at ultra-processed foods and, you know, doing a bit more research about it?
That's a really good question. I've always considered myself a healthy eater. I worked hard to be a healthy eater, and I've known about processed foods, just not a good thing, but I really didn't know as much about them as I really needed to. So over the Christmas holidays, I read Ultra Processed People by Chris Van Telken. And while I knew ultra processed foods weren't good for me, I never understood just how bad they could be. And I also didn't understand what big food corporations can get away with and how deceptive marketing practices and even labels can be. So then I did more, as you talked about, I did more reading, more rabbit holes, more research. And my biggest takeaway from all that is that no one is coming to save us, meaning that it's truly up to ourselves to get informed and then from that information make the best food choices or food resistance choices that we can make.
Yes, and I just want to touch on that point because I just find there's so much information out there in on the internet and in books, and there's so much about eat this, don't eat that, and then the next week it's, oh no, don't eat that, eat this. And it's so I think a lot of us just throw our hands up in the air and say, you know what, it's all too hard. And especially when you get to those labels where you've got to read things. I know that we've got to watch our saturated fats and Mike has to watch his sugar, but trying to get foods that don't contain both of those that are processed, it's very difficult. So I want to go back to the basics if we can, and just get you to explain what ultra processed foods are and the difference between them and whole foods.
Sure. That's a great place to start. And the definitions, again, as you're talking about, are very blurry and very muddy. It depends who you ask and what you read. Van Tolkien in his book says, in a nutshell, if it's wrapped in plastic and it contains ingredients you would never find in a standard kitchen, it's ultra processed. In my mind, it's really complicated. Ultra processed foods are industrially formulated foods. They contain preservatives, emulsifiers, artificial flavors, artificial colors, stabilizers, all those extra ingredients I tended to ignore because I couldn't actually read them. I really didn't know what they meant. They're often really high in sugar, salt, unhealthy fats, and they don't typically retain the original value of the original food. So if you're having chicken McNuggets, that's so dissimilar to whole food chicken, but we think, oh, well, I had chicken, check. And so a lot of these ultra processed foods contain what we would think like soft drinks and packaged snacks, those junk foods, but also gets into instant noodles, processed meats, fast food, box cereals, even if they're labeled as healthy, most store-bought breads, even whole wheat bread, flavored yogurts, and then it veers into foods that have health food claims. So when you were saying you and Mike are trying to avoid certain things in your diet, often it will claim low fat, low sugar, low this, but then they've snuck in a chemical cocktail, which isn't good for us either.
Mm. Well, I've actually trained Mike because he does the shopping in our household, and I've trained him to read the labels. But you almost have to have a university degree to see it, and also to understand it, and you also need to have good eyesight because all the little nasties that are added in are so small you can't really read what they are, and then it becomes confusing because you think, oh, as you said, I don't know what that means, so I won't worry about it. So basically, the whole foods are foods that really have had no processing at all,
Or
or
minimal
very, very
processing.
minimal. Yeah. And so, minimal processed foods are okay or not too bad. It's just the
Right.
ultra ones. And I think, as you said, we know the main ones. You know that if you eat drink soft drink or chips or lollies or all cakes or all those sort of things, okay, well, they're ultra processed. But then you've got all the hidden ones, which we'll talk about a bit later, but even peanut butter can be a trap. And I love that. So, as I said before, we overload information out there and everything seems to change week to week, or it seems to. You've obviously done a lot of research on this. So can we talk about the science behind ultra
Absolutely.
processed foods? And okay, listeners, it's not going to be boring. Okay. Science does not need to be boring. So
Absolutely.
let's talk about that.
Sure. Well, and actually that's why I wanted to do this because as you explained in the beginning, I don't have a health background. I don't have a food background. I'm just a regular person trying to make sense of all the information and misinformation out there. So I thought that would be a bit more relatable than
Mm,
some science background who may more automatically know these things. But ultimately, from a food manufacturer's point of view, getting into the original science, the purpose of ultra processed foods is to make money, to increase profits. I mean, they're a business and they're responsible to their shareholders. So that makes sense. But that starts the trap of UPFs typically contain low cost ingredients. They have long shelf lives because that helps with profits, and they're highly palatable, which makes us keep on wanting to eat them and buy them. And they're aggressively marketed to consumers. And there's not a lot of regulations on how that marketing looks right now. So that starts the whole beginning of the trend. But one thing I did want to talk about when you're talking about science, if there people just take one thing away, there's something called the bliss point, and this has been meticulously researched by food companies to hit that exact point of fat, sugar, and salt that makes us wanting more, that maximizes our pleasure and hits our brain's reward system, driving overconsumption and overeating because that just tastes so good. So that's not a random bliss point. That's a well-researched bliss point by food companies. What's going to hook us onto this and want to eat more? You know, in that old Lay's potato chip slogan, bet you can't eat just one. That's not just a catchy jingle. That's a really well thought out engineered design to make us consume more and often overconsume.
That's right. And also, as you mentioned before, I just want to bring up an important point about the packaging where they have low fat. And you think, great, I'm going to go with that. But then if you looked on the label, you're going to see it's added salt or added sugar or something like that to make it taste good. So whenever they change a food, they've got to add other stuff in to make it taste just as good as the real thing.
Right, absolutely. But you're tricked to, because those labels often on the front are saying healthy, low fat, low sodium, low this. And that's what I was buying because we wanted to be healthy. My husband wanted to reduce his fat and calories. So you think, I mean, when you're, at least when you're buying potato chips, you know what you're getting. But when you're buying something with health claims, that's really quite sneaky and really confusing. Now,
Yes, and sorry, Donna, and I think that um, it changes in different countries. Like what you can claim to be. So, a low fat might only be a small percentage or whatever, but in one country it might be a different percentage in another to be able to make that claim, or low cholesterol or things like that. So they're just sort of sneaking in to those levels to be able to make that claim, and they're not really true at all.
absolutely. There's a lot of deception in there because, as we said, and I mean, you really can't blame them there. There's not one individual person who's the bad guy here. They're companies that are responsible to their shareholders to make profits. So they're trying to do that, where we're just trying to feed our families and ourselves and make sense. But there's so much other science, if we get back to that. UPFs are soft foods, even if they're like Cheetos and you think, oh no, Donna, those are hard and crunchy. Only on the outside. As soon as you have that first crunchy bite, the rest just melts in your mouth. So they're really easy to eat. And by being easy to eat, they're very easy to overconsume. And research is even saying, especially now for our children, is that by the reduced chewing, it actually weakens and shrinks our jaws as well. So it's actually changing our physical nature by this soft chewing. They're also really, as you were talking about, really heavily refined. So they're stripping the fiber, protein, essential nutrients of foods just by the heavy processing. And then they may put back in vitamins. So you're seeing on that package, Sue, this percentage of calcium, this percentage of vitamin C, and you're saying, oh, well, that's all good. I'm getting this. But not necessarily, because those synthetic vitamins, calcium for sure, are not absorbed by our bodies or used by our bodies in the same way, like calcium carbonate, which is commonly in fortified cereals. Our body doesn't use it the same way as it would calcium from leafy greens or from dairy. So that adds all to the confusion, but also to looking after our health. Those synthetic materials are never as good as the real thing.
No, exactly. Now, so we've talked about the science and also the packaging and things we need to look out for. The other thing is that you usually find that these ultra processed foods are much cheaper to buy. So, we've got a problem with cost of living out here in Australia, and you may have it in Canada as well. But people are really struggling to even pay their mortgages and so forth. So food becomes, what can I buy that's cheap, that's going to feed the family or feed us? And invariably it's those cheap, those ultra processed foods that are the cheapest, aren't they? So that's a bit of an issue for people to get over.
It is a huge hurdle, and really, we need support and our government stepping in on that because it is cheaper, and a lot of these food corporations are going into those poor areas and squeezing out the local store they had because they can undersell them, and so then those poor families are totally hooked on this not nutritious food, adding to other problems, but they can't afford something else. So that's a real problem. I at least have the luxury in my retirement that I can grin and bear it, suck it up, and pay for the healthier food. But it's much more expensive. Not everyone can do that. So it's a really huge vicious circle.
Mm, mm. Yes, and it is. And look, I suppose it comes down to priorities, but our health and well-being, I know it sounds trite, but it should always be our priority, because otherwise it's going to cost us in the future, not just us, but the taxpayer and everything. Because if we don't look after our bodies, they're going to start giving up on us, and we're going to need medical attention. That's going to cost more. So
And the
trying to avoid that is
right.
important.
Absolutely, and there are some great chefs out there, just like Jack Monroe, and she has a free website where she does cooking on a bootstrap. So she's avoiding ultra-processed foods, she's doing healthy foods, but at low, and she's putting the prices on it. This is the cost of the beans, this is the cost of this, to make it as cheap and affordable as possible so people have a free resource. So those are coming up more and more, which is at least some help in a really difficult area.
Yes, and I think also it comes back to, we hear buying in season. So if I suppose it's a creative way for us to start thinking outside the box and not just buying the same fruit and vegetables all the time. Looking at what's in season, because a lot of the big supermarkets freeze everything and then they bring them out, and you're thinking, oh, I'm having this, and it's really not the season for it. But invariably, if you buy in season, that's a bit better as well for your budget.
Oh, absolutely. That's something we're doing right now, and we're midwinter, snow on the ground, Vancouver Island. And I'm buying locally and cooking locally as much as possible, not to get into the politics. Canadians are also really trying to buy Canadian and being very aware of the country of origin of what we're purchasing. So last night for dinner, I had root vegetables that were all Canadian, grown right now on the island. Beets and potatoes and carrots all grown here, hothouse tomatoes still grown here, and local Vancouver salmon. So I've had everything from our small island, even though it's the dead of winter. So it is doable, which is good. And it's, for me, that's the way to go.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we've talked about science, we've talked about the science behind it, but what are the health risks? Why should we be concerned about having these ultra processed foods?
There's many reasons. I'm going to go to the biggest one for me. If I had just one reason, it would be the impact on our brain health. As you know, Sue, my mom is currently suffering from dementia, and she has had this for years, and I am suffering along right beside her. It's such a horrible disease to go through. In 2023, a UK study found that just a 10% increase of UPFs in our diet, where the average American and Canadian has 50% of their diet, by increasing by 10%, we increase our risk of dementia by 25. So just a
Mhm.
small increase in UPFs is now found in more than one study to significantly hurt our brain health. And there's lots of reasons for that. So that alone is going to make me stay away from UPFs, because I already have this in my close immediate family, dementia, and I want to do everything to protect myself from it. But there's a lot of other things. One of the reasons for it affecting dementia is the inflammation, which is a big part of UPFs and the chemicals that lead to inflammation, and also to imbalance in our microbiome. So the microbiome is our gut health that we need to keep healthy and vital, but it affects those two areas, which affects everything else. So not only dementia, which I'm concerned about, but also cardiovascular disease and gut health. Our full whole body at our health and cancer are at risk from the chemicals and the processing and ultra processed foods.
Mm, mm. And I think you touched on that. Sometimes it needs a personal experience. So you were talking about your mum. For us, I've got a history of cancer and cardiovascular disease in my family. Mike has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So when you are faced with something like that, that's probably the time you try to make the changes. I mean, it's better if you can do it before, but it's never too late. I know that Mike now has his sugar level under control and is doing really well, but that's because he's tried to inform himself about things. He's still learning, but trying to inform about things and just making better choices. So, because he really, we both want to live as long as we can. So our longevity is linked to what we put into our bodies.
Absolutely. And that's really good news, what you're talking about when they're looking at when people have, because people could say, oh my God, I've eaten UPFs my whole life. I was fed them as children, so I'm just going to give up because it's too late. It is not too late. Research is proving the opposite of that. It's not too late to clean your diet and actually really reap the positive benefits of doing that. But the other thing is this studies on UPF are really in their infancy. This really our current knowledge of the dangers of UPFs just started in 2010, so that's really not very long ago. So some foods we thought then that, or some additives we thought were risk-free or were going to be fine for us, now have proven not to be fine at all and are red flagged. But what will, as we evolve in our research, it's likely that more and more additives that you're seeing on the back of the package are going to be, we're going to find out health dangers with them, more dangers than positives. So it is in its infancy. We have gotten great information, but it's evolving. And as it evolves, I'm sure we'll get further and further information, not always good news.
Mm, mm. And the other thing that you mentioned to me, you sent me some notes through on what you're going to be talking about, is the environment impact as well, the environmental impact, not just on our bodies, but on
Right.
the world.
And I threw that in. I know it's a whole different podcast that somebody else might want to do, but if you're looking at most of ultra processed foods are packaged in plastic. So that plastic is a whole big drag for our environment, not helping our environment at all. And a lot of the foods you see are actually ultra processed foods are derived by soybean and palm oil. Those are big ingredients in ultra processed foods, regardless of what it claims to be at the end. So there's all that industrial farming and uh, destructing of our land. So those are big areas. So there's huge concerns for our human bodies, but also huge concerns for our planet.
Mm, mm. Okay, so let's talk about you. You decided that you were, obviously you read the book and you thought, "Oh, I've got to make some more changes to what I thought was a healthy lifestyle." So talk about you, your personal journey, and then we'll talk about what actions you took to eliminate the UPFs.
Well, sure. And I did lots of reading, but why I keep on coming back to Van Telken's book is that like somebody on Goodreads called it the horror book of the year. Like they gave it a 5-star, but they called it the horror read of the year. And it really was. It really, I couldn't read that and just go, oh, well, I'll go back to my cheesies and flavored yogurt. But for many years, I leaned into vegetarianism for the reasons we talked about. I was never a full vegetarian, but I considered myself a healthy eater. I worked hard at being a healthy eater, and the neighborhood and my friends considered me a healthy eater. I had friends come from the States this summer, and they walked in, and we had wine on the table and chicken on the stove, and they went, oh, we thought we were coming in an alcohol-free, meat-free home. Like, so I was really known as the healthy one. But for me, some of the choices I made because of that were what we were talking about earlier. I was choosing UPFs because I was avoiding gluten for my husband. So there were all those chemical additives. I was avoiding dairy. So there were all those chemical additives. I was avoiding meat, but then sometimes would say, oh, this chili will taste better if I use Beyond Beef or a veggie patty in it from the store commercial. And that was loaded with chemicals and unhealthy things. So sometimes by trying to make healthy choices and I was reading the front of the label and believing them, healthy, fat-free, sugar-free, everything free, then I was getting a bunch of cocktails that chemical cocktails I hadn't been bargaining on.
And I think that's the other thing too. When you go shopping, most people, well, I don't really enjoy shopping. That's why I let Mike do it. But a lot of people are time poor. So they just go in and they just throw things in without looking at I haven't got time to read the labels, or because it could take you quite a while if you wanted to go through everything. But you made a start, and that's the thing. I thought I was healthy too, but we can always make improvements. And, I think it comes to really looking at the topic we're talking about today, and sort of really getting into it and trying to understand it. So what actions did you take, to start on this elimination of ultra processed foods?
Yeah, well, one thing I did is I quit assuming, because a lot of times we assume it's just this part of our diet, so we ignore the other parts we think are safe. So I went back to everything and had huge revelations. Like my soy milk, and this is different for everyone and every brand, but the one I was using was soy milk that was sugar-free, organic. I mean, I thought it should have achieved sainthood. And yet when I really looked into it, it was filled with gallon gum, with stabilizers, with stuff I didn't want to put in my body. But, when you're buying organic, sugar-free soy or flavor-free soy milk, you're thinking you're getting the real thing. So that was tricky for me. And then when I looked into it further, in Canada, they have to say they can say natural flavor if they've taken it from a natural source, but they don't have to say the chemicals they use to extract that flavor. So a lot of times, again, there's those chemicals leaching in that they don't even have to list. They just have to say natural flavor, but they don't have to talk about how they got that out. So that was all in my soy milk. My peanut butter was a bigger shock because I was just buying the name brand peanut butter, or the regular one that's sold everywhere here. And that had palm oil, corn syrup, sugar, not good things I wanted to be consuming. And one of the things on that, which is really frustrating, is that the palm oil helps it to emulsify, so it's not separating. You don't have to stir it. But it's also a cheap filler. It's cheaper for food companies to fill more palm oil than they need than peanuts, because palm oil is more expensive. I mean, it is cheaper. So I'm getting a cheap filler. The same thing with my whole wheat bread. Most bread bought in the store, even if it looks healthy and it talks about all these grains it has in it, ultra processed. So food labels are deceptive. And, you would think that, again, potato chips, those kind of things, instant noodles, not particularly healthy. But when you're talking about nut milk, peanut butter, whole wheat bread, a lot of us would just throw that in the cart, not thinking. So those are where we were. And so what I did, and what I would recommend everyone to do, even if they don't do anything else after that, is become better informed. So information is power. So just so we get informed, then if we choose to do nothing, that's okay with me, whatever you choose to do, but get informed. And that was my big start with it. After being informed, everyone is going to do something different. And this is where we all just need to support each other and realize Sue's choice is going to be different than Donna's. But my choice was, because we have to do what's sustainable for our personalities. And you described personality a bit in the beginning of this, so the viewers get that idea. But my approach is, don't get in this car with strangers approach. When we're kids, your mother teaches you not to get in the car with strangers, which means ultimately you miss a lift from a really kind person who just wants to help you get to where you're going, but you also avoid that potential danger of something more evil. So for me, if I can't pronounce it, if I'm not sure what if it is, if I'm concerned about those chemicals, I'm just not putting it in my cart, and I'm just taking that I'm not having it approach. And then instead of it, just choosing simpler foods, whole foods that you talked about, the less ingredients on the package. My peanut butter now only has peanuts and salt in it. I'm good with that. Not everyone is going to do this, and I know you and I have talked about this. but I picked up a $35 nut milk maker, and I make my own almond milk, my own oat milk. I actually have fun doing it. Richard helps me. It's as quick for me as for me to make a smoothie, and I really like the taste. Who knew? But someone had said, "Oh, Donna, you can make your own bread." Okay, I can assure you that ain't going to happen.
Mm,
But I just buy an artesian bread from our local bakery. I support them. I get something without all the processes in it. So, and let's just start making food swaps that you talked about on your website that I highly recommend people joining your challenge because it's been so good for me. But just we talk about, swapping out our salad dressing, which is just laden with chemicals, for oil and vinegar. And you have
mm,
to see the trade-offs. Like when we switch to just oil and vinegar dressing that I'm making at home, yes, it has more calories. Richard's going to have to get over it, but it doesn't have that cocktail of chemicals interfering with our bodies. Um, and just breakfast choices, we quit having boxed cereal. Richard loves Raisin Bran. Too bad. We're having oatmeal or homemade granola, other choices that don't have those chemicals in. We eat at home most of the time anyway, but when we eat out, we're just really mindful of what we order. And then one other thing that I'm doing that I never did before, I sort of living in Beijing so long, I sort of buy more groceries on a daily or bi-weekly, short-term basis for 1 or 2, 3 meals. But now I'm meal planning for the whole week ahead. So I'm saving time, saving money and effort that way and having more of a plan for what my week's meal look like, more than just doing it on the go. And
mm,
also,
mm,
I wanted to point out, and this is Sue, a bit like books that you and I talk about a lot. Somebody's favorite book is somebody's least favorite book. But apps can be really helpful, just apps for your phone. So, and there's a million of them, but there's an app called Yuka. If you don't like that one, there's other apps I can trust you. It's a free app. You just scan the barcode in your grocery store and it will give you a score. Like my peanut butter, it actually gave it 3 out of 100, but listed the reason why: the fat, the sugar, the salt, and the whole long list of ingredients of the cocktail in there. So these apps, like you said, you don't like being in the store, you can just like shoot your barcode at it, get it right away and say,
mm.
yep, I'm having this one. And no, I'm not having that one.
And sorry, how do you spell that one?
That one is Yuka,
Oh,
Yuka.
yeah. Yeah, as it sounds. Yeah,
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. And then some people don't like, because it does actually rate the food. I like that. I'm not overly concerned about the rating, but a 3 out of 100 is going to make me stand up and pay
I
attention.
think. Yeah, yeah.
And then I make my own, but sometimes it's rated a food more highly or more lowly than I would have. But also when it gives a negative rating, and it's not associated, they don't take any money from any food corporations. But if they're with my peanut butter, it recommended 10 other peanut butters that I could have instead. So I don't have to abstain, but I could have something that was healthier.
Okay, I just want to ask you with the almond milk, how many almonds do you have to use?
You use a cup of almonds, so a cup
Oh,
of
okay.
yeah, just a cup of almonds. And the good news is you get to recycle them because you get really a cup of almond pulp left, because it starts mixing up with the water and that. And then Richard is super happy about this because he loves muffins, and there's lots of recipes online to make muffins, homemade healthy muffins out of the pulp. So I just throw that, if I'm not going to be making almonds this month, I just throw the pulp in the freezer until I'm ready to make them. If I'm going to make it right away, throw them in the fridge. But it's actually a really rich, creamy milk. You can also do it with oats, which is super easy. Same thing, I think oats, you're using half a cup of oats. So
Okay.
it's not so much, and it's been affordable and sort of fun.
Well, you might have convinced me. I'll get you to send me the link for the product that you bought, and I'll put that in the show notes, because if it's that easy, I might be on board. Because I know that I have soy milk and Mike has almond milk, but if we can make that better, we will do that. Now, is it difficult to do? I suppose you have to be committed, and you have to think about taking back control of your health, don't you?
You do, but you know what was the easy part? And this is there are two things that have made this all completely due to, and I'm totally in. I'm having a good time doing this. My husband is totally in. I bought him, I was reading the book from our library because I read everything from our library, but I bought him the book so he would read it. And he read 20 pages a day until his time was, he's just finished it. And then we kept on having those discussions. So I have a partner who's on board. If I had a partner not on board, rolling his eyes every time I talked about ultra processed foods, it I don't know how doable that would be. And then
Mm,
also every day, and actually when I'm finished this talk, I'll go online. I go onto your website where we've got a group of women, and it's growing every day with people that are supporting and sharing. And for the month of February, you've devoted that to ultra processed foods. So people are talking about where they are on the journey and supporting each other, but I never hear judgment. People aren't going, oh my God, there goes Donna down a rabbit hole again. Or no one's saying, oh, Sue, why are you eating that? So it's really supportive. So having that friendship social base that can support you
mm,
online is perfect. And having a partner that can support you, or at least be not supporting you,
mm.
those are two key pillars that make it doable.
Yeah, I think, unless you're living alone, you have to have people on board because otherwise you'd be making half a dozen different meals and that sort of thing. And really, we've got to set an example to our children and grandchildren anyway. So if we can start showing that you're not really missing out eating whole foods, you can still have things like you said, muffins and all of that sort of thing, but it's the product that you put in, it's the way you make it. And is a lot of information and cookbooks out there and online that will give you those recipes as you've suggested.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like one of the cookbooks I picked up because of Van Tolkien, in his book, he suggests different chefs, different cookbooks, different resources that you could use. So I picked up some of those, and it just made it a lot easier to be on board. And also knowing that other people are trying to do the same thing really feels encouraging and empowering.
Mm, mm. And so how are you feeling I think, what, 6 weeks into
Just over
really being
just
with
over 6 weeks.
UPF?
We feel the difference, and this is ironic because we thought we were healthy eaters before, but we feel either if it's psychosomatic or it's physical, Rich and I feel better, we feel healthier, we feel less tired, and I like the challenge, I'm sort of finding it fun. We haven't been focused on restriction at all, we still eat, but if we want a muffin, I make healthy muffins, we're good. So
Mm,
we're not focusing on what we can't have, we're focusing on the fun, about the simplicity, about enjoying real food, supporting our local markets. So we really and if any people are interested in watching this and eliminating ultra processed foods from their diet, there's so many ways to do it. But I always recommend just start small, start where you are, and then take those steps from there. And for us, it just snowballed into we're feeling really good where we are right now.
mm, mm. Well, that's great. I mean, we could be talking about this for hours. It's such a huge topic, but what I love is that you don't have the health background or qualifications. You have done this research yourself, and you're sharing your story with us so that we can relate because we're all the same there. Now, before we go to my last question, which I always ask my guests, what is there anything else that you'd like to? What would be one or two quick tips that you could give someone who has listened to this and thought, oh, I've really got to do something, but I'm just not sure what to do? So, what would be, say, the first 2 or 3 steps that you would recommend?
I would just get informed. And, the book I read is 400 pages. So that's not everybody's jam. But I would say Chris Van Telken and different people in that sphere have 10-minute videos. Just watch a video that just compresses everything that we've just talked about and choose one thing to start with. You can just say, okay, I'm going to start with this one thing. When Van Telken was asked about that, he said, if you're drinking soft drinks, the pop, fizzy drinks, and you were looking to eliminate just one thing, that's the one that he would eliminate, regardless of whether it was regular sugar soft drink or a diet soft drink. So they both have stuff in there in massive quantities that we're consuming. So if you made one change, that's the change you would have. I've never been a soft drink drinker, but my husband always had diet soft drinks because he thought that was good for him. And
Mm,
that's where we started with him, that we eliminated that.
mm. Yeah, I like the idea of starting small because, you look in your pantry, you've probably, it might be full, and you think, what a waste to throw all of that food out. So I think you do have to start small, start replacing just whenever you go shopping and you've used something, replace it with a whole food after, inform yourself, make your shopping list and go through your pantry and then just start replacing little
Right.
steps at a
Don't
time.
Don't feel bad about that. Feel good about that because Van Tulpen says he recommends, and what he did is while he was learning about he is a doctor, but as he was learning about ultra processed foods, he kept on eating them. Actually, he increased in eating them, which is a anti-smoking trick. So he was eating ultra processed foods when he was learning all this stuff about them. And by the end, he was so disgusted with what he had been eating, he just couldn't eat it anymore. Like he still doesn't. He's totally abstained.
Mm,
So, but he recommends while you're learning about it, keep on eating it. And that will sort of be a brain learning connection, brain body connection of, no, this is not nourishing my body.
mm, mm. Yeah, no, that's a good point too. Well, Donna, it's been lovely chatting with you today. Before you go, I do want to ask you the question of, and I haven't actually given you any warning. So it's what does being a woman living well after 50 mean to you?
It means a lot of things. Thank you. I was a little bit nervous there for a minute, but you know what it means is supporting other women. I'm always so excited when I see women supporting women, and I'm sad when it doesn't happen, and it often doesn't happen. I just have to give a little story with my mom. She was having a memory test from a young nurse, and the young nurse was doing her best, and my mom was just not into it. She was not answering things I knew she knew how to answer. Until the woman said, did you ever work outside the home? Well, my mom owned for years and years an insulation glass company. Like this was badass stuff way before the day that women did that. I was a young child. And the nurse then immediately turned to my stepfather, who was never part of the scene. He wasn't around at that time, not even in the same province, and said, oh, did you run that with your husband?
Uh,
You would never, ever say that to a man. Oh, did you run that with your wife? How cute.
mm,
Seriously. So I
mm.
actually walked to the parking lot with her and said, that is so, women have to support other women, like that. I know you didn't mean to be unsupportive, but why couldn't you just take my mom at face value? That was her company and she ran it. In an
Yeah, and what an achievement.
Yeah, so one thing I love about why I'm always on your site, stalking you there, is women supporting other women is totally my jam.
Mm, mm. Well, I agree. And that's why I have the podcast, because I like to think that I'm supporting women to tell their stories or share what they've done, share their experiences, and hopefully help the listeners as well take some information away. So that's all we've got time for today, Donna. We could talk for hours, as you know, and this topic is probably far from done. So we might get you back in a few months to give us a recap, or you might have found out something else. I do want to say, though, that I think you need to write a book
Okay.
because you've got, from the notes you sent me, you've done so much research. And I think a book from someone who doesn't have all that, scientific background or technical background would be so helpful to just the normal person out there trying to get a handle on things. So I think I might be going to be pushing you with that project and
Oh, I'm
putting
just
in a timeline for you.
knowing who we are. I am so, though I'm a blogger, I so don't have a book in me, but there are a lot of great writers out there. So if you would like me to ghostwrite anything for you, send your information. They can contact me and I'm happy to do that. And you
Yeah.
and I actually know an author, so we can,
Yes, we do. We do. But I do think that sometimes it's much better to have the information from someone who's been through it and is, like you're a wonderful person. I'm not putting you down, but you're normal. You know what I mean? You haven't, you're like one of us. You're not highly qualified in that particular area. You are highly qualified in other things, but you've made the point of really informing yourself, and you're reaping the benefits of it now, which is really great. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Well, that was a great conversation. I always enjoy talking to Donna because she's a friend of mine, but she really has done a lot of research on ultra-processed foods and had a lot of information there for us, but in ways that we could understand as lay people. So I hope you'll go and have a look in your pantry, see what's in there, and do make a commitment to make some change to the way you eat, because we are really, you know, responsible for our bodies. Our bodies are so important for us, and we want to enjoy life. So if we're healthy and having an optimal health and lifestyle, then that's going to, mean we can enjoy ourselves. So thanks for joining me for another episode. I hope you've enjoyed that and that you'll share it with a friend, because this has some really good information in it. And until next time, remember to live well, enjoy life, and most of all, be a woman living life your way. Bye for now.